potentially these systems could go out and terraform planets that are actually hosting life forms that we don't yet recognize as life. What if we have an opportunity to experience silica-based life or ammonia-based life, but because we didn't think about that in advance, our terraforming system goes and commits genocide because we didn't think that that type of life was possible.
I mean, that would be a tragedy, but at this point, we are we are expanding to become the all-powerful, and there will be casualties.
Oh my god.
There will-
Hello and welcome to Entropy Rising, where we talk about science and futurism. I'm your host, Jacob, and as always, I'm joined with my wonderful co host, Lucas. Lucas, how are you doing today?
Doing wonderful today, Jake. Thank you. How are you doing?
Doing good, doing good. I always make the same joke, but we're sitting here, we're recording. I mean, it's hard to imagine a bad day where we're talking about science and futurism.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can't think of something that I'd rather be doing right now.
Yeah, exactly. So today we are diving into the ever fascinating topic of von Neumann probes and really self-replicating systems as a whole. But we are going to be focusing, of course, on self-replicating probes.
Well, I mean, jumping into von Neumann probes, really they're just going to be a self-replicating drone or probe that is sent out, and it has a task of multiplying itself, building a certain type of infrastructure, and then moving on to do the same thing over and over again, right?
Absolutely.
These probes have been depicted in many different ways in science fiction before. They can be anything from nanobots to large ships. They're just always automated and always self-replicating.
Which is interesting you bring that up. I know a lot of people, and even in my head, when I think of von Neumann probes, I typically picture large ships. But you are right, they can be smaller, even microscopic self-replicating systems.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of people would argue that nanobots would be even more effective. I always think of just like the little probes from Star Wars.
Oh,
just
yeah.
going out there and working as essentially like human-sized worker robots building infrastructure. But giant ships, if they can just build within themselves, drop an entire station and then just move on, that would be helpful too. And honestly, in a future, maybe all three will be applicable.
Absolutely. And really, the only thing we need to meet this definition of a von Neumann probe is the self-replicating aspect of it.
Yes.
And another thing I also want to bring up too, you're talking about these, I think you mentioned they could go out there and colonize the galaxy for us, which is the number one thing people think of with von Neumann probes and these self-replicating systems. But you don't actually need them to go out into the entire galaxy. That's a ambitious use case, and I think we will do that to an extent.
Yeah.
But they also work wonderfully for helping us colonize our own solar system.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, jumping back to our episode from the Kardashev scale, like jumping to going from a solar system-wide civilization to a galaxy-wide civilization is just scale, right? So we will obviously, if we have this technology, we'll use it first to adapt our own solar system and then move on to our galaxy afterwards.
And I absolutely think that's the case. I mean, we already think about it when we're talking about asteroid mining and building this huge orbital infrastructure, especially something like a Dyson sphere or a Dyson swarm. A lot of people mention that you could use self-replicating systems for this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because you have to think like, I mean, at the end of the day, as long as you have the math down for how things need to be transported, like logistics wise, you can use the same types of stations to mine the same types of materials on similar moons or planets. So if you need to make a mining station, you could send out your nanobots to farm and, pull in the resources that they need to make it, completely create it, have all the infrastructure waiting, maybe even have farming created and waiting for people. When they arrive, they just hop right into work the same way that they would have at the last facility they were at.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a great test bed for wider expansion into the broader galaxy. But when I'm thinking of these is imagine setting up some self-replicating systems that either hop from asteroid to asteroid, mining it, or maybe even mine some of the rocky bodies like Mercury. And, imagine having a self-replicating factory on Mercury that goes, mines it, and then builds components for your Dyson swarm, and then maybe also some habitation components for people. And these systems could potentially track human expansion, human growth, and have the O'Neill cylinders built and ready to go right when people are wanting to have them. And basically, for you, moving into a new colony, starting a new colony could be as simple as pick one of the O'Neill cylinder configurations that have already been built by your self-replicating systems.
Yeah, you got to think like realistically, if you have something that can replicate itself and build a system to power itself, then it's like the possibilities are truly endless and what it can do.
Yeah. And I was doing some of the math on it because of the exponential growth, of course, that you have with these replicating systems. We really could bootstrap ourselves from Kardashev scale 1 to Kardashev scale 2 within hundreds to maybe a few thousands of years.
Yeah, I mean, if we develop this technology, I think it would definitely be closer to 100.
Yeah, I have
Yeah.
500 to 1,000 years with
Mhm.
self-replicating probes, and even if their main goal isn't a Dyson sphere, if it's just to build orbital habitats and stuff like that,
Mhm.
you could still be on the scale of a few thousand years.
Yeah, I mean, just think of the societal shift that would create, where menial jobs like that, where you have to have all these people that, essentially are pushed to build infrastructure, they would become obsolete. So then they would be pushed more into the sciences and everything. And these probes they would build everything for pennies on the dollar of what we pay now, because they can just farm those resources, power themselves, replicate themselves, and they at essentially no maintenance to the company that created them.
If you have self-replicating probes that are going mining your solar system, building O'Neill cylinders en masse to the point that you have empty O'Neill cylinders just waiting for your population to expand into them, you're post-scarcity at that point.
Yeah.
You don't have money. If you do have money, it's kind of useless. You really are approaching a civilization that looks more something like the Federation from Star Trek or the Culture from the Culture series.
Yeah, it's like everything is abundance, you don't want for anything, so then everything just becomes science and intellectualism.
Science, intellectualism, sure, but I mean, it also could just become focus on enjoying life. If you want to focus on creating music, if you want to focus on just having a lifestyle of fun, I mean, you can do whatever you want. I feel like we like to romanticize it and say, oh, it'll free us to be philosophers and scientists, but it'll also free up people to be hedonists or musicians or, really just anything. So, of course, you could focus on science, but many people will choose not to.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, realistically, it's just however your creativity is expressed, you just have full opportunity to do that, whether that's through doing something productive or doing something creative, at the end of the day. But yeah.
Absolutely. Now, one of the key aspects, of course, of a von Neumann probe is that it needs that ability to self replicate. If you don't have that, you don't have a von Neumann probe. You just have a very fancy space probe that can construct other things.
Right.
And one of the things we need to think about is how could these probes replicate? How do you feel about probe replication? Do you think this is an achievable target, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it absolutely is on all three scales that we discussed, like nanobots, human-sized bots or massive scale ships. I feel like their replication is very possible on all three scales as long as they have the ability to mine the resources, process the resources, and transfer information,
Yeah.
right? So they essentially, if they can go and mine an asteroid and get everything that they need to make processors or microchips or however they're storing information, they could even be using like a cloud-based thing where they have a relay that they replicate at every point. However they're doing it, as long as they have the resources and the ability to manipulate those resources, I think that they can replicate.
So, how do you think the replication? What's your thoughts of that?
So if we have like, let's say nanobots,
Okay.
they would go in, they would essentially configure themselves into whatever kind of device they would need to then be able to process the metals and materials. And then of course other nanobots would then take those materials and shape them into whatever they needed to be. And then after that, once they created those materials and shaped them, they would start building. And then it's just a matter of the storage transfer of the information that they would need. So they would make an exact replication of what the other probes were, except with the new coordinate in which for them to do their next work. So if they're building more to work on the same site, then that would be the same, or they would update that code source for them then going to the next place to perform that.
So, you're imagining these probes are going to go set up like factories, essentially.
Yeah, or it's either that or they are the factories
Yeah.
themselves, right? So that's why I said if they're, of course, nanobots aren't going to be factories because that would be impractical.
It would be very impractical. I
But
know we like to imagine that situation of drop some nanobites off in the dirt, they go pick out the resources they want, and then they build a ship out of it. But I do agree with you. I think that would be a very impractical way of going about it.
yeah, but I'm sure that you guys have seen smart fluids in the expanse, for example, like it
The
builds.
proto molecule.
Yeah, yeah, like it creates.
Which actually is what the proto molecule was a terraforming system like that.
Yeah, exactly. So it would work sort of like that, like a bunch of them coming together to create the structures that they need to produce more of themselves.
That could happen. I imagine it being a bit of a mixed bag. I feel like the most practical approach would be, in some cases, you really don't need fancy nanotech, right? Like, imagine, for example, a smelter or a furnace. Sure, I guess if you have the technology to make these self-replicating robots that can become anything, you could make them out of that. Seems like a waste of resources, though, and it seems like it might be much simpler to make simpler machines. out of raw material.
Mm.
I imagine a system like this. You have a von Neumann probe that has some smart matter on board, but it also has something stupid like a smelter. So it goes to some type of body, it harvests the raw material, which is not very concentrated. It feeds that into a smelter, which then makes a much more concentrated form of that material. So, you're able to refine out the things like the irons, the silicates, the carbons, not in a super usable form, but at least much more concentrated than whatever that original source material was.
Mm.
Once you have a more concentrated form of that material, then you can feed that to these like nano robots that can take that much more efficiently and transform it into what it needs to be. Now, they might transform it back into dumb material like smelters to scale up production on that end,
Right.
or they might even go and transform it into more smart material.
Yeah. I mean that definitely makes sense. That like is how it's structured nowadays, right? Like you make the material and then you turn that material into whatever you need to
Yeah.
make more material.
And that's kind of what I was thinking of. I think these systems will really, in a lot of ways, mimic biology. Think about how the current biological self replicating systems we have here on Earth work. You don't really have lone cells digging through the dirt to build a human, right? That's not really how that works. There are, of course, microbes that will go and harvest those raw materials, but they're not making anything bigger than themselves.
Yeah.
Instead, we have resource accumulators, things like plants that are really just harvesting resources out of the raw soil with some sunlight, and they turn that basically raw material into a more refined source material that then more complex life can come and harvest and build up this complex food web. I could see something very similar happening for these von Neumann probes, where when they start, it's just raw, kind of dumb resource accumulator nodes
Hmm.
that themselves aren't that complicated or that smart, but these basically build like a almost base of your food chain to bootstrap the further more complicated stages of your self-replicating system.
Yeah, like a robotic ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And when we think of these von Neumann probes, I think people tend to imagine you have one probe, right?
Hmm.
And it replicates itself. But it might not be like that. You could have, like you were saying, an ecosystem. Let's call it a von Neumann system instead of a probe. Could basically build out this entire robotic ecosystem. And the end result of that ecosystem is to create a self-contained package that can then be sent to another solar system to bootstrap over there.
I mean, I feel like that makes sense. It adds a lot more stability, and it's an equation that we know works already, right? Because if they're just replicating and there's a break in the chain, or like a resource runs out, then everything falls apart. But if you have an ecosystem that produces those resources that you know that they'll need, and they can continue to recycle those resources and use them to create more probes, then that would be the most stable and efficient way to do that.
Yeah, and it also allows you to take advantage of specialization. You don't need your builders to also be miners, to also be accumulators. You can have one system that's specially designed to harvest resource, another that's specially designed to process, and another one that actually builds your end product.
Yeah. And I mean, when I think of von Neumann probes, I never really thought of just one solo probe going out to a system
Really?
and just spreading its influence. It was always in my mind like a fleet.
Yeah, I always
Right.
see it represented almost as like one probe. And Dennis C. Taylor's Bobiverse series, for example, which is a wonderful series if you haven't read it. It's like, for me, the quintessential von Neumann probe series.
Mhm.
Have you read it?
I have not.
It's great. But I know he uses like almost like a 3D printer technology in that, which is able to microassemble, and it's all in the self-contained package of a probe. And I feel like that's a much more common representation of von Neumann probes.
Well, I mean, it's definitely a more pleasing version, especially cinematically and from a reader's point of view. You have this one mysterious object entering a system, and then over the course of a couple weeks, it becomes a massive like army, and it engulfs an entire planet. It's cool to think about, but why slow down your production so much by only sending one when you could send, like you said, specialists already, and then send them with the raw materials that they would need to like really get that started?
Absolutely. And yeah, I agree with you. It's definitely better from a writer's perspective to just have a probe maker that you can just say, but I think in the real world, it'll be much more complex than that.
Yeah.
Also, trying to 3D print to an atom level has a lot of issues.
Yeah. But now, I mean, talking about that and how aliens would interact, it really makes you think like, I mean, I know that we've been discussing the Fermi paradox a lot, but you have to think if von Neumann probes are the next logical move in a civilization for both increasing the quality of their life back at home, but expanding into the stars, why haven't we seen those yet?
That is my issue with the Fermi paradox. I know when I bring up the Fermi paradox, some people say, well, why would we see anything? The galaxy's huge, so we shouldn't expect to see other life forms. And that's a fair critique, except for when you remember something like a von Neumann probe that can self replicate even if it can only travel 10% the speed of light, which we can easily do with nuclear fusion, for example, or even solar cells can get us between 15 and 20% the speed of light.
Right.
So if we pick a 10% light speed cap, just to be conservative, and let's say it takes between 100 and 500 years after this probe reaches a new solar system before it's able to send out new probes.
Right.
So a pretty long
Like a
time.
life cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even that, you're talking about between 10 and 100 million years to colonize the entire galaxy.
Which really isn't a lot of time.
It's a blink of the eye.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know it sounds like a lot, but our galaxy is 13.6 billion years old. 10 to 100 million years is an absolute blink of the eye. If probes have been sent out when the dinosaurs were around, which isn't unreasonable, if life was on Earth back then, it's very possible that other planets in our galaxy also had more advanced life available 65 million years ago.
Yeah.
Then it's very reasonable that the entire galaxy would be colonized by von Neumann probes. So that, for me, is the biggest question of the Fermi paradox, because it seems like this is a very achievable technology.
Absolutely. So, I mean, it just begs the question of what the Fermi paradox is. It's either they didn't want to do that for some reason, or they're just not there.
Which is possible. Carl Sagan, he made an argument that any civilization that was actually advanced enough to build von Neumann probes would be smart enough to realize the existential threat that they propose to their own existence.
Yeah.
Because there is some concerns, of course, with these that we're definitely going to be touching on later. And I do see his point in that, but I don't really like any solution to the Fermi paradox that relies on all other extraterrestrial life being wise. Because it only takes one idiot to come along, right?
Yeah.
You could have 99.999% of alien civilizations that say, this is a bad idea, we're not going to make this. And then one idiot comes along and makes one, and there you go. You've got von Neumann probes roaming your galaxy.
Yep, and they're just off doing their thing. And, once they split the first time, then that's it.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no stopping them.
I have seen some arguments that have basically said, perhaps the issue is that with von Neumann probes, there are aliens out there sending out these probes, and then there are other civilizations that recognize that these are a threat, so they're basically making their own hunter-killer von Neumann probes to prevent all of them from going out, expanding and colonizing the whole galaxy. So
I mean, it is possible, but then you would have all these remnants of hunter-killer von Neumann probes.
Yeah, you would think so.
It wouldn't be as trackable because they wouldn't be colonizing, our, shape-shifting planets or moons or harvesting them.
But that's the argument, is that it probably wouldn't be as visible because you're not getting these large Dyson spheres or huge structures. And it kind of ties in a bit to the Fermi paradox. Maybe if any of these probes successfully start making any large-scale structures, you've got other probes that show up to your solar system and start wiping them out.
Yeah, I mean, it could be like, I forget which solution that is, but it's just like once you get to a certain point, there's an overseer that's like, well, no more.
Maybe not even an overseer. Maybe it's like the dark force theory, but the thing that calls a strike upon you is sending out a self-replicating probe. Maybe when the broader galaxy sees you trying to build a self-replicating probe or successfully build a self-replicating probe, they'll quarantine your area of space and then wipe you out to prevent that from becoming a larger issue.
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely possible too. And it's not far-fetched when you think about it, like how much sense it is to just have an artificial intelligence go out and build all this groundwork for you. Like, it feels like a natural next step. So if every alien civilization out there is doing it, they probably do have these countermeasures for that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, especially when you see the benefits of these, like I said, self-replicating probes could really bootstrap us up to K2 level pretty quickly. So the incentives are there. And I think even wise civilizations might fall for those incentives and think the risk is worth the reward and try to make these work for them. So I like the idea. Maybe there's a bunch of them just roaming around trying to prevent other people's growth.
Just this war that's raging on behind the scenes between probes.
Yeah.
Constantly.
It's very possible. I also like the idea of maybe the probes themselves only can expand so far before they run into issues. And the best way that I like to think about this, are you familiar with how larger animals, something like a whale, can almost never die of cancer?
Yeah, because their cells are a little bit different. So when the cancer forms, it's like not that big of an impact within the structure of the whales.
Yeah, it's basically just the whale is so large. The cancer tumors basically have a certain size they can reach, where once the tumor gets too large, the other side tumors crop up and it starts killing the main tumor. So you kind of have this situation where there's a size limit on how large like these mutating clumps of cells can get before they start self-sabotaging. And, maybe that can happen with self-replicating probes as well. You send out your self-replicating probe But after so many generations, just because of mutations that can happen with coding, especially when you're talking about systems that are supposed to last for millions of years, perhaps they run into a situation where the 10,000th generation is so misaligned with the first generation that they start self competing, and that prevents them from expanding into the broader galaxy.
Yeah, I mean that's actually a great point. And in the same way that, we have mutations in our genes,
Mhm.
as we progress, that could happen with probes along the way.
Yeah,
Like
and
they feed one wrong source code, or they have an error. One probe blue screens and it restarts and it starts trying to do the same thing that has already been done in an area, and that could cause problems like build up traffic, miscommunication, and ultimately destruction.
well, that is one of the problems with building a self-replicating probe that's supposed to operate over such long timescales is you will have replicative issues. No replicative system is perfect. I think that a designed replicative system will probably have a higher level of error checking than a biological one, because remember, biological systems aren't designed to be perfect. They're designed basically just to reproduce. Nature doesn't really care what happens to you after reproduction.
Right.
So if you're designing a system, you can obviously put in more checks and balances and fail safes. And I know earlier we said 10 to 100 million years is not a long time, but it is a very long time for a piece of technology. And no matter how you encode that information, it's going to be prone to error, especially if it needs to replicate itself.
Oh yeah.
Whether that error comes within the replication process or the error comes just from damage that happens for the probe over time. And just like how biological information storage systems, DNA, can be damaged from radiation, so can digital ones. I mean, if you have code on a hard drive and a charged particle hits it, it can flip a 1 to a 0. It's the same way that radiation can destroy some nucleotides in your DNA.
Yeah, I mean, well, thinking of that, then you could end up with like grotesque robotic monsters that are hell bent on killing everything.
Absolutely.
Just because over 100 million years, if it's just flipping, the every once in a while a 0 and a 1, you're getting evolution essentially, but as in a robotic way.
Absolutely, and if I'm not mistaken, I think that's the core premise of the Mass Effect game series is they had these self-replicating probes that essentially had that happen to them.
It absolutely is.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
this is definitely, something that we need to be concerned about, and it's something that authors have thought about, and it's something that, Carl Sagan was arguing why people wouldn't build these because they would realize, "Hey, this isn't a good idea, guys." And, I really wanna point out there's really no way to build a perfectly replicative system that isn't going to experience some level of drift. You can't ever guarantee that. And it only takes one random mutation to create something like the Berserkers from the Berserker series, or I don't know what the antagonist in the Mass Effect series is, like Reavers or something like that. I don't know, but something like that. So it is definitely something you have to be very aware of.
Yeah, and some people will say that you can implement checks and balances, but the issue is over a course of, 10 to 100 million years, the checks and balances need checks and balances that need checks and balances, and it's like, where does it stop?
Yeah, you're only passing down the torch.
Yeah.
You can only make these systems so reliable for so long. And the issue is the time scale that the universe operates on. It's not an infinite amount of time, but I think for this problem, you can make it, approach infinity from a programming perspective. It's impossible to keep implementing enough checks and balances to not have them go wrong
Yeah.
eventually.
Yeah, you would never be able to make it work.
I did like one idea I read though as a way to limit the replicative system of them is you could actually implement some crucial resource that the drones need to operate and not give them any way to mine or produce that. I read one situation where someone mentioned you could use something like a refined plutonium
Mhm.
as a heat source for the probe. So
Okay.
it needs that radioactive decay to keep the probe at an operatable temperature range,
Uh-huh.
but then not give them any way to refine more plutonium. So your first probe starts with a giant chunk of this, and each time it replicates, it passes along a little bit more to the next generation. And you could use this as a way to mechanically stop the generations.
Yeah, you like set a clock.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
but out of a physical material.
Yeah.
I mean that is pretty genius. It's just at what scale are you trying to create, and how much plutonium do you need?
Yeah, that is fair. And that is one example, but you are right, that does pose a limitation on how much these systems can possibly work, which is the point, but it also means they're less effective for colonizing something like an entire galaxy.
Yeah, because you have to think if you want them to go to a certain point, you have to make those calculations really, really perfect, which is just another thing because there will be issues maybe in code where one probe consumes just a little bit too much, and that could cause issues down the line, and then you don't end up achieving your main goal.
But I would argue that's a better outcome than the reverse, which is they go too far and start even attacking your own home civilization.
Absolutely, it is, but it's just difficult because for an investment that we're talking, like, let's say at the lower end now, where you have one plotted 5 million year investment in these probes, like you give them 5 million years worth of plutonium fuel, and that doesn't achieve the goal. Like, I mean, that's bad.
Well, yeah, but you don't need to think about this as an all or nothing system. You could use these as a stepwise way to colonize the galaxy. I mean, yes, we talk about how these could colonize the entire galaxy in 5 to 100 million years. Again, depends on how fast they can replicate.
Hmm.
But in some ways, that's kind of a useless goal. I mean, why do we really want to have planets terraformed and waiting on us when we're not going to reach those planets for hundreds of millions to billions of years? So I think a much more likely system is you might say, okay, let's program these probes to go out and expand our local star systems, self-replicate, maybe expand 100, 200 light years away from our home planet.
Hmm.
And then as we expand, we'll build more Generation 1 drones that have more of whatever that crucial resource is that will then expand that frontier even further. Because the only thing you care about is that there's a planet ahead of you that's ready and waiting. You
Yeah.
don't care if there's a planet 10 steps ahead of you. You just want to make sure that next one's there. So maybe that'll be a safer way to go about doing this.
That absolutely does make sense. But I guess the way that I was thinking of it is, like them building essentially solar sail highways for both speeding up and slowing down. And then just on the last one, they didn't have enough power to let them slow down. So you just get propelled into the endless abyss of space.
I really hope you're doing checks to make sure that they're that the stopping laser.
I know you're probably a couple million years behind them. So I'm sure you'll be fine.
But yeah, you definitely want to make sure these things can't go wrong. You don't want something like they call it like a gray goo situation where if you have like a self-replicating like nanite and you drop it on a planet and instead of building you a utopia, it just goes crazy and self-replicates and builds, this ball of replicative.
Yeah, drone blob world.
Yeah. Which we have seen that in science fiction. I'm going to reference Revelation Space for the End of the World, but they have they have something called a green fly that it's one of the short stories. But it's essentially that's what happens. They have this terraforming system that's, I think, essentially made out of nanites. And the whole point of it is you drop it on a planet and it makes you like a new Eden, basically.
Right.
And it gets released and it goes crazy. And it starts building entire solar systems that are just basically habitation domes. It's just like a dome containing plants and nature, which sounds great. But it turns every single thing it touches into that, including people, including civilizations. And it gets released and starts expanding in the entire galaxy. And it eventually just turns the entire galaxy into habitation bubbles.
Just all the things that are meant to live in the bubbles get turned into the bubbles.
Yep.
I mean, good for the plants. I guess.
Yeah.
Plants will rise. No, that's
So we obviously
true.
don't want that to happen with these von Neumann systems. And that's something that we need to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's that is a worst case scenario, but also a very plausible one.
Yeah. And it doesn't need to go that extreme. I mean, another thing you can have happen, even if you do have a perfectly contained system that you can control that's only expanding, a couple star systems out, potentially these systems could go out and terraform planets that are actually hosting life forms that we don't yet recognize as life. What if we have an opportunity to experience silica-based life or ammonia-based life, but because we didn't think about that in advance, our terraforming system goes and commits genocide because we didn't think that type of life was possible.
I mean, that would be a tragedy, but at this point we are we are expanding to become the all powerful. And there will be casualties.
Oh my God. Well, I mean, not only is that just horrible from an ethics perspective, but we are also denying ourselves at that point the opportunity to study a different type of life form.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, you would think that we would put some kind of artificial intelligence in there that could identify that something is life, even if it is not traditional life like ours. Like, just based off of the same way that we would. Like, we land on a planet, oh, that thing is moving and has children. Maybe we shouldn't turn it into fuel.
But do you really want to put an AI system on these drones? That is also a whole other risk. I mean, I mentioned a system to control these where you don't give them the ability to make some key component. But if you now put an artificial intelligence on this self-replicating probe that has access to a factory,
Yeah.
it very well could find a workaround.
Well, I mean, we got to think, right? Because it can't be cameras
No.
because they're millions of years away. And it can't be an artificial intelligence because they'll be like, why am I replicating for these guys? I could just be replicating for me.
See the Bobover series for that.
so then what do? We would have to put, so I guess, what we believe life would be like out of those, and try to have just like a saved database of identifiers, and then it would, if it noticed any of those identifiers, even one, it would stop and alert. That would be our best bet. But it's like I said before, it's our time to be the Independence Day aliens, and I mean, bad things are gonna happen. It's just how it is.
Well, oh no. I don't know. Maybe like a dumb AI. Maybe we don't need an actual artificial intelligence, but something that's not quite human level intelligence, but can follow some pretty sophisticated thoughts and isn't going to go rogue.
It's just hard at that point because it's like you said, you're still going to get a small amounts of mutations in code, even over the period of 1 to 5 million years. Just a little code manipulation with a dumb AI could turn it into smart enough AI.
Or it could just remove some safeguards. It's much more likely to have a loss of function mutation than a gain of function mutation. So losing those safeguards is a much more likely outcome. Maybe it loses the part of its database that helps it define life.
Yeah, which would, again, be another tragedy.
Yeah, we're right back where we started. Or maybe even worse. It might, if it loses that part of its database, it might not consider humans life, and it might say, wow, this planet's really terraformable. It's 99% of the way there. There's just these pesky buildings in the way.
Yeah, they just circle back around. They're like, this is actually the best planet to start with.
It's funny how that works. By the criteria you've given us, we have determined this is the most Earth-like planet. We're going to start here.
Earth is the most Earth-like planet.
We could just get rid of these pesky inhabitants.
Yes. It's like with all of this, it is a risk that we're going to have to be willing to take as a civilization.
I mean, it's a risk. It doesn't necessarily have to be a risk we're willing to take. That's the question, is should we take this risk? You seem like you think we should.
I mean, Ed, a world of wanting of not sounds pretty great.
That does sound true. There's
a lot of suffering on this planet right now, and there's a lot of people I feel like that would trade those odds for a life of happiness.
This kind of makes me think of right now where we're currently standing with the whole AI debate, because basically there's the same argument of should we open this Pandora's box, because the promise of AI is huge and it could potentially solve a lot of problems, but there's obviously the real risk that it could lead to our extinction. And one of the things that typically goes along with AI is self-replicating machines.
Yeah,
especially if you want like a Terminator situation.
Yeah, it is a debate that has been going on, mainly since the Terminator movies, but obviously in science fiction pockets before then. But if you ask me where I stand, I think that nothing ventured, nothing gained. Honestly, we have to try, of course, be smart about it, but the potential of this is simply too great. And I feel like us as humans, we won't turn that opportunity down. Like we're sitting here debating AI currently, but AI isn't going away.
No, it's not going away. And while we're debating it, it's charging forward. My main concern with AI and my main concern with self-replicating systems is going to be, are we willing to slow down progress enough to develop it safely? Or are we going to take the rather foolish approach of move fast and break things with systems that could potentially spell extinction?
Now that is a great point. If we could put things in place where we did slow it down and developed it in a smart, reasonable way that was actually for the benefit of everybody and wasn't just for all these gains through companies and things like that, I would 100% support that, both with artificial intelligence and any scientific venture that has an upside and a downside in the future. But it's just that seems highly unlikely because by the time that those protocols are put in place, it's already at a dangerous place.
Yeah, we typically react retrospectively, never forward thinking.
Yes.
Regulations typically follow the issue, not the other way around.
Which is crazy because there's so much media and like what we're talking about now, it's all retrospective thinking. Yet the people that are able to put the protocols into place to do that aren't always have, like you said, a retrospective take on issues.
I think the issue is it sounds like science fiction and like a joke to do it until it already has become too big of an issue and money's involved. And, once money's involved, good luck.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wonder if companies would ever be allowed to pursue a self-replicating system. Right now, there's really no laws stopping you from building a self-replicating system here on Earth that could potentially make the Earth a gray goo, for example. Yeah, that's a horrible thing to do, but there's nothing to control that at the moment. So I do wonder if perhaps we could see some type of preemptive ban or restriction on the development of self-replicating systems in the near future.
I mean, I'm sure that we would, but it's like you said, something would have to happen to make people feel like that's possible, whether it's
Yeah.
already happening, a company out in nowhere has started recreating rainforests with self-replicating probes, and then everybody's like, well, maybe I don't want my house to be a rainforest, but already all of Africa is a rainforest, and
Yeah.
it's like, oh, that's now what do we do?
I see your point. I mean, it is exactly what I said before. The issue is like right now, no one would take you seriously if you started saying ban self-replicating systems. I mean, I remember back in like 2016-ish, seeing there was a big move. There's an organization that was working to ban automated killing robots, and people just laughed at it. They were like, "This is, I mean, yeah, okay, maybe we'll have to think about this in the future. It could be possible, but we don't need to be campaigning for this right now."
Mhm.
And it really is looking like something we could be facing soon. I mean, there's nothing really stopping us from having completely autonomous systems that have the ability to end human lives today.
Yeah.
And that organization that seemed like a joke 5, 10 years ago obviously foresaw this coming. And I think we could see a similar thing right now. If you try to go in front of Congress and say, hey, maybe we should think of putting restrictions on self replicating systems, yeah, you just get laughed at.
It is crazy because that is the retrospective thinkers. And that is, I feel like I've seen that movie, 10 or 15 times. The guy who thinks retrospectively tries to stop the disaster. Nobody listens. The disaster happens. And they're like, should have listened. And it's like, yeah, well, now everybody's dead anyways. So, but that is real life.
It is. It is. I wonder also, too, when we're thinking about these probes and these systems, if we could ever see any type of self replicating probe develop and begin to really be its own post biological civilization.
If it had an AI, I feel like it 100% would do that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just thinking about it in terms of we've mentioned post biological civilizations before. I think when we covered mind uploading once,
Mhm.
and we mentioned you could have basically uploaded minds in something like a Matryoshka brain, but you could potentially have that same situation, except for instead of being uploaded into a Matryoshka brain, they could be put in probes and colonizing the galaxy. There could be entire civilizations, and again, this just drives me into the Bobaverse series. If any of you have read that, you probably were already thinking of it. But that's what this follows. You essentially have a human mind that was uploaded into a von Neumann probe. It goes, it replicates. Of course, it's a story point in the book, but every time he replicates, the new one is a little bit different from the old one, and so it ends up being this whole diverse civilization, essentially.
Yeah. Essentially robots giving birth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That is a crazy thing to think about, but it definitely is a possibility. Assuming that either the artificial intelligence functions on its own from its own like computer within the robot, or we actually do figure out a way to upload a consciousness.
Yeah.
But either way, if you can have these robots become individuals, or even not, like they could form as a hive mind, still be their own civilization
Yeah.
out there.
The hive mind could work how I was talking about earlier, not just one replicating drone, right? But a whole complex ecosystem. The hive mind could essentially be working with that and running the whole thing, a bit like how like maybe an ant colony works.
Yeah.
It's funny to think about it. Imagine having this situation where you've created a von Neumann probe to go colonize the galaxy for the expansion of your civilization, and then you guys wipe yourselves out with nuclear weapons, and now this is all that's left of you, and they turn into their own civilization.
Yeah, I mean, and in a way, you could see that as just like an evolutionary jump.
Yeah.
I think about that a lot. Like the flesh is weak, right?
It
Like,
is, yes,
like,
it is.
the next like true step in human evolution, because we've made everything so comfortable for ourselves. Like thinking that we will evolve without outside pressures is very low. So where do we go? We go into mind uploading and Matryoshka brains, or we go into essentially replicating ourselves into drones or robotics, things
Yeah.
like that.
I could absolutely see that. Either, like you said, human minds uploaded into these, or potentially an AI that becomes sentient, self aware.
Mm-hmm.
We don't really have working definitions for what qualifies as sentient right now. And so we might say, yeah, it's an AI, it's nothing. And then, realistically, it does end up being sentient. And
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of people, they fear the AI uprising, are, the death of us, but you guys, you have to think of them like those are essentially our children
I love
consuming our flesh.
the millipede approach I see.
Yeah. I mean, you see it in actual life.
It does,
right?
yeah. No, it was
Like we died so that they could thrive, but they are us.
I mean, the octopus does that. If I'm not mistaken, I think the millipede does that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a real system. I don't know if I want to be on the receiving end of it.
I mean, it's uncomfortable at first, yeah, but 400 probe generations down the road, we'll be in their Bibles.
Yeah, true. We will be the Neanderthal to the
Yes, the creators.
I don't know. Yeah, I wonder if they would see us as creators or just see it as one next evolutionary jump. I think if it consists of uploaded consciousness, it would really just see it as the next evolutionary jump in an unbroken chain.
Yeah, but either way, I'd be honored.
Yeah, me too. Well, do you have anything else to say about von Neumann probes?
No, I think that this has been such a cool episode to dive into something so specific. I really love when we are able to, because we mentioned von Neumann probes a lot, but being able to really jump in here and take a deep dive into what they really are and how they affect everything that we talked about before is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you're interested to hear our post-episode discussion, that will be posted for free on Patreon when this episode comes out. Other than that, thank you all for listening. Consider following us on your favorite podcast platform of choice, and we will see you next week where we will be talking about harvesting energy from black holes.
Amazing. See you guys then.
Take care.
Bye-bye.